What if the samurai had bulletproof armor? As firearms started to appear in Japan around the same time as they did in Europe, it seemed as though the samurai way of life was about to change. But by the mid-1800s, muskets had not replaced swords in Japan. Swords were still very much the weapon of choice for the samurai. And there was one big reason why. Muskets lose their advantage. At first glance, it seems like the samurai should have been wiped out by firearms. After all, what's more powerful than a sword? In the hands of an untrained peasant, maybe? But for a highly trained warrior, guns make perfect sense. They're portable, reusable, and could easily kill an opponent from far away. So why didn't they replace the sword? Well, because of this. When the matchlock musket first arrived in Japan, it was a real threat to the samurai. The Japanese sword had been refined over centuries and was incredibly efficient at cutting down opponents, but the spear was even more deadly. One advantage of the spear is that it could be used to deflect incoming attacks, giving the user the opportunity to counterattack. However, its greatest advantage was its reach. The long shaft of the spear kept the user far enough away from his opponent to avoid being slashed by a sword. Of course, the samurai could close the distance and stab the spearman with their sword, but then the spearman could simply pull his spear back out of the way, forcing the samurai to attack with their much shorter katana. All in all, the samurai were actually at a disadvantage when facing off against spearmen. But the samurai weren't stupid. They adapted. Instead of lunging forward with their sword, they changed their fighting style to keep their distance and slash at the spearman's weapon with quick side-to-side movements. While it wasn't the most effective way to wield their superior blade, it was better than charging headfirst into a wall of pointy metal. Eventually, the samurai perfected this fighting style and became even deadlier than before. Meanwhile, the musket fell out of favor. For one thing, it was bulky and slow compared to the bow and arrow. But the biggest problem was that it couldn't compete with the katana in close quarters. Since most battles in Japan took place in forests or mountainous terrain, guns just weren't practical. Sword fighting lives on. By the late 1800s, it seemed as though swords were becoming obsolete around the world. But not in Japan. While other countries were transitioning into industrial powers, Japan was stuck in the past. But it wasn't just tradition that kept the samurai way of life alive, it was necessity. You see, Japan's geography made it difficult for any large-scale invasion force to take over the country. This led to a false sense of security among the ruling class, who believed that their country was invincible. As a result, they poured all of their resources into the military and made the samurai into living gods. Today, only a few dozen samurai families remain in Japan, but they are still revered as national heroes. In fact, the country's top military general is given the title of shogun, an ancient title given to the commander-in-chief of the samurai army. Japan resists the West. While the rest of the world was industrializing during the 1800s, Japan was still using swords and bows, but this didn't last forever. In 1868, a group of samurai overthrew the government and opened up the country to Western trade. This had a huge impact on Japanese society and eventually led to the country becoming a major world power itself. However, the samurai were eventually phased out, and the katana became nothing more than a ceremonial weapon. Today, Japan is known as one of the most peaceful countries in the world, and the samurai are seen as symbols of the nation's cultural heritage. In fact, many people believe that the samurai way of life is still alive today in Japan's pop culture. From anime to video games, the samurai are everywhere. A feudal empire that never falls. When the Tokugawa shogunate took over Japan in the early 1600s, they established a feudal empire that lasted for over 250 years. During this time, Japan was largely cut off from the rest of the world. However, this isolation allowed the country to develop its own unique culture and way of life. The samurai were at the top of Japanese society and were revered as heroes. They lived by a strict code of honor and were expected to be loyal to their lord and master. But as the centuries passed, the samurai began to lose their importance in Japanese society. The Tokugawa shogunate eventually fell apart in 1868, and Japan was forced to open up to Western trade. This led to the rapid modernization of Japanese society, and the samurai were eventually reduced to nothing more than ceremonial soldiers. However, the legacy of the samurai lives on in Japanese culture today. The katana is still seen as a symbol of Japanese pride, and the Bushido code of honor is still followed by many Japanese people today. What do you think would have happened if the samurai had bulletproof armor? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.